For our chalice lighting words today, I've chosen words from William F. Schultz, a former president of the UUA, from our reading. Come into this place of peace. Come, let its silence heal your spirit. Come into this place of memory, and let its history warm your soul. Come into this place of prophecy and power, and let its vision change your heart. Now I invite you to join in our opening hymn, number 21, an oldie but goodie, For the Beauty of the Earth. Betty and Pat will be leading us in this one as well. Stand as you are able or choose to. One of these days we'll have other people will be watching us and going, how impressed they are. Cumberland, right? I think so. I believe in you. Well, if life were fair, carrot cake would be a vegetable. At the very least, in their natural states, carrots would have all the same taste, texture, and aroma of freshly baked carrot cake. But that is not the case, of course. And what makes it worse is that we know that. We have the ability to turn an otherwise healthy vegetable into cake. And we have the capacity to choose what is good for us, carrot or cake. This is what author Michael Pollan calls the omnivore's dilemma in his book of the same name. It's a little more complex than that, but you get the idea. If I were a beaver, for example, I would not feel deprived if given the inner bark, twigs, leaves, and roots of trees and shrubs. If a carrot cake were placed next to a scrumptious twig, I would not feel conflicted. Beavers never wonder how they can spice up their sticks, do something a little different with the bark, just flavor that water. They have no dilemma. But the human dilemma is compounded by the fact that we are not only faced with having to choose between things that are good for us and things that aren't, we must choose among a variety of alternatives, in many cases, all of which are good for us, but which in many cases are mutually exclusive. Indeed, not that the carrot cake makers of America need me to defend them. There is nothing inherently evil about carrot cake. Such cakes contain many healthy ingredients, and that's all I'm going to say because now I'm getting hungry and I want carrot cake. That's my favorite. That's what we have on my birthday is carrot cake. So that's why I chose that example. I'm sure you could fill in your own. Ethical eating touches a lot of bases. Industrial agriculture produces large quantities of affordable food, arguably at the cost of our health and environment. Some of the complexity of our food system is captured in this paragraph from Pollan's book, in which he discusses this dilemma, this omnivore's dilemma, in making a totally organic meal that included asparagus, which had to be imported because it was out of season where he was living. Quoting now from Pollan, the ethical implications of buying organic broccoli from Argentina are almost too numerous and knotty to sort out. There's the expense There's the prodigious amounts of energy involved, the defiance of seasonality, and the whole question of whether the best soils in South America should be devoted to growing food for affluent and overfed North Americans. And yet you can also make a good argument that my purchase of organic asparagus from Argentina generates foreign exchange for a country desperately in need of it, and supports a level of care for that country's land, farming without pesticides or chemical fertilizer, that it might not otherwise receive. Clearly, my bunch of asparagus had delivered me deep into the thicket of trade-offs that a global organic marketplace entails. End quote. Which is to say that everything we eat, the choices we make, reflect values. And that's the theme, the values. Few things test them like Thanksgiving. Every culture has some form of harvest festival, but that's driven by the calendar. It's not necessarily a big holiday everywhere, but here it is because it is a national holiday. And that reflects civic as well as religious and spiritual values. So my childhood Thanksgivings were largely spent at my maternal grandmother's home, Louisville, Kentucky. It was a recognition of both abundance and scarcity. Abundance because, well, of all the food. There was always at least two of everything, right? There were like rolls and then there were biscuits. And then there was two kinds of dressing. There was oyster dressing and then what I called regular. And at least three kinds of pies: pumpkin, apple, and pecan. Now, sometimes there would be mincemeat, which I never really took to. And to this day, I don't know what it is. Okay. In any case, there was a lot. And everything was made from scratch. No store-bought pies for my grandmother, not even the store-bought crusts, right? She thought it was a sin to buy anything less than a whole chicken or turkey because she would use the entire thing until she got down to the soup and to the stock for other recipes, right? If she were to see me today buying boneless, skinless chicken breast, she would roll over in her grave. There was also this notion of scarcity because it was also a sin to leave anything on your plate because of all those starving children everywhere else. Now, I suspect this part of my story may be unique. My father and three of my uncles were ministers. And each of them felt compelled to say something before the meal. And the whole thing was the meal was practically cold by the time we got to it. And as they droned on, my cousins and I would look at each other. Sometimes we just roll our eyes. And then sometimes we get the giggles. And we'd have to stifle them. And I think that may be the hardest thing in the world to do, is to stifle a giggle in a solemn moment. Right? But we did that. In any case, I learned to associate certain values with food, things like family and gratitude. I thought of abundance as a blessing. But as a child, even though we always prayed for those less fortunate than we were, I really didn't have a sense of inequality and the consequences, the people who really were without. And so it just seemed like words to me at the time. Away from the Thanksgiving table, I picked up other values associated with food, particularly sweets, as a means of affirmation, comfort, and security. My parents used food as a reward for good grades and other achievements. I don't think they were alone in that. How many have done that? You have? Yes, you bribe your children with food. Yeah. Give them rewards. It was also a consolation. So if I had some disappointment in life, the response was, well, let's get a dish of ice cream. Yeah. And I don't think we were alone in that one either. I think some of us still may do that. Unfortunately, even when weight was becoming an issue for me, my mother would say, well, you know, you've been really good on your diet for a whole week. You can have a treat today. We'll get ice cream. So it's not a perfect analogy, right? But it's like offering a recovering alcoholic a drink for making it a week. You know, it's like, no, it's just, and I have to say that played head games for me until I was in my 30s. So in those formative years, I associated food with self-soothing as a response to, well, just about anything. I could be happy and let's have something to eat. I could be sad. Well, let's have something to eat, right? And I know I'm not alone in making that association, but then for me, it took a turn. As I started gaining not just weight, but a lot of weight, my weight became a source of troubles and trauma. I was teased and bullied because of my size. Gym class was a daily trauma for me. When we ran laps, I was dead last by 50 yards. When we had to climb a rope, I could not lift my body weight, still can't. I have never been able to do that, and maybe that'll be one of my goals in retirement, is to be able to lift my body weight. I've never been able to do it, but at the time, they would send me and I'd grab a hold of it. I couldn't even go up a half a foot. And I was just kind of hanging there, and people kind of giggle, and even the gym teachers would laugh. So I really felt betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect me. Which is the biggest form of betrayal. You'd think that would motivate me, right, to lose weight. But in one of those ironies that convinced me there could not be a benevolent God, I went the other way. I ate even more because my body size protected me from further trauma by removing any expectations anyone had for me. Right? There was no pressure to play sports. As my older brothers, very accomplished, trophies all over the walls, right? No pressure there. There weren't any girls in my high school interested in dating someone who by then was approaching 300 pounds. And I was oddly okay with that because I felt safe. Because if you never asked anybody, you would never be rejected. So it's weird, isn't it? I'm seeing nodding heads. I think people are kind of identifying with these parts of this story. I do hope you'll forgive me of being a little too self-indulgent. I am my favorite subject to talk about. But at the same time, I think a lot of people are identifying with at least parts of this story. But so let me make 3 quick points that take the particulars of my story to universalize them. First, I'm not asking for feedback here on my story, right? I worked through this stuff decades ago, okay? Which doesn't mean that I don't struggle with food and eating. It means that I've gotten the help I need and that it's not the obstacle it once was to me being happy, joyous, and free. And that's how I feel almost every day, okay? But the struggle is still there. It never goes away. I'm one of those folks that says you're either an addict, an active addict, or a recovering addict. Right? So I would never say I'm recovered in the past sense. It's still there for me all the time. But I'm a happy, joyous, free person. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Elsewhere, they might say, amen. Okay. Second, this is related to the first point. The values I associate with food and eating may have served me well when I didn't have other tools to deal with my troubles and traumas in daily life. That is a very incredibly profound point, if I may say so. That's so much bigger than just this topic of ethical eating. All right. Let me just say it again. The values I associated with food and eating may have served me well when I didn't have other tools to deal with the troubles and traumas in my life. Affirmation, comfort, and security are not bad values. I needed to learn new ways to apply those values in my life, and I did, as the Beatles would say, with a little help from my friends, which includes my Unitarian Universalist faith. Put a bookmark there, we're coming back. Third, though, what we must do as a nation is what I had to do as an individual. The cultural norms and values associated with food may have served good and noble purposes at one time or another, but they're not working now.
Amen.
The New Deal programs saved farmers from foreclosure, but between 2017 and 2022, there were 141,733 fewer farms. Our free breakfast and lunch programs in schools are for too many children the only meals they may get on some days, even if ketchup is still counted as a vegetable. You have to wonder, though, as noble as that is, what they're putting on those plates, because type 2 diabetes is expected to rise 700% by 2060. That gives us some time frame there. That's last year, 13.5% of all American households, that's 18 million households, not people, households, experienced food insecurity. Our agricultural policies have fed millions of hungry people all over the world. We produce 4.3 pounds of food for every person every day, which is enough to make anybody obese if they actually ate all of that every day. But hunger and malnutrition kill more people than AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis combined. So it's not a lack of food. That's not the problem. Now, I won't make you uncomfortable with any descriptions of what happens at meat packing plants, but I will share this quote with you from Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was a vegetarian. But don't be too proud of that, so was Adolf Hitler. Just saying. But Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Thoreau, he was a vegetarian as well. You have just dined, and however scrupulously the slaughterhouse is concealed in the grateful distance of miles, there is complicity. In short, what we're doing is not working. Many of those well-meaning policies are short-sighted, self-serving, and with age, wisdom, experience, we may reframe our policies around food to better serve ourselves, our nation, and the world. Perhaps more to the point for today, we may advocate for changes in our approach to food that better serve our Unitarian Universalist principles that recognize the inherent worth of individuals, justice and equity for all, and respect for that interdependent web of existence in which we all live. Well, the next part of this story started with me back in the 1990s. I've been dealing with, when I say I've been dealing with my whole life, I have, but in this part of it, really since the 1990s, in my 30s. I'd heard about a self-guided 10-week voluntary simplicity course. It's offered by the Northwest Institute. It's just a book, and it was just meant for self-study in small groups. And I had just joined the Unitarian Universalist Church of Rockville, Maryland, my first UU church. And they didn't have exactly what I wanted, so I just went out and created it. I just put a note in the bulletin, said anybody interested in doing this 10-week thing I found, come to an interest meeting, and we had enough. And we went through the thing. We had a 10-week course, or 10-week course, about 10, 12 people. And that was, I really was able to then introduce myself to voluntary simplicity. And that's where a lot of voluntary simplicity deals with ethical eating and related issues, lifestyle type issues. That's the first time that I had read where the water and grain used to make beef could feed 20% of the world's population. That's an old statistic, but it's still true. Now, I can't say that I became a convert for life. This, you may identify with this as true as well. I became a vegan for a while, right? And then I was a vegetarian. And then I was somebody who just ate a lot less meat. And I've gone through that cycle several times as I hear a presentation just like this, and then I get motivated and I become a vegetarian again for a while. And I've been doing this now for 30 years, right? Of going through these cycles of getting closer, feeling like I know what I should be doing, and then feeling motivated and doing it, and then not, right? Which is a lot like the weight to begin, frankly. There's a lot of values that are like that. For me, though, the search for a better understanding and relationship with food never has ended. And turns out I was not alone then or now. Now, in 2008, the UUA chose the topic of ethical eating as a congregational study action issue, culminating in a 2011 statement of conscience. I'll share that with you in a moment. I was talking to Tom about your congregational history. Jan's not with us. She promised to read or to view the videos. Hi, Jan. Later. But she was active in talking about that. And but I gather beyond that, it hasn't like stuck, if you will. The guide, which is all the stuff is still on the web, had 4 core values: environmental justice, climate change, environmental degradation and water, human rights and social inequities, which included separate sub-issues: domestic food security, labor, fair trade, and neo-colonialism. And then finally, animal rights and human responsibility. So it addressed all of those topics. The resulting statement of conscience, which is the highest form of social justice witness the UUA undertakes, had several findings and recommendations. You can also read that on the web. It's easy to find. Here's a key paragraph. We acknowledge that aggressive action needs to be taken that will ensure an adequate food supply for the world population, reduce the use of energy, water, fertilizer, pesticides, and hormones in food production, mitigate climate change, and end the inhumane treatment of animals. These steps call for an evolution of our eating habits to include more locally grown, minimally processed whole foods. We acknowledge that this evolution must respect diversity in cultures, nutritional requirements, and religious practices. And they did that. You could tell, like any statement of conscience, it represents a compromise. But they tried to cover all the bases there. And I think they hit some pretty important ones. So there's many ways that this congregation can respond to this message. Now, again, getting the history, Tom thinks you went through the Green Sanctuary program, but the UUA doesn't. I mean, you're not listed as a Green Sanctuary program. They have a little thing where you, if you're certified in that. And that's just a process by which a congregation undertakes to study issues that relate to climate change and other things, various projects and presentations. And then at the end, you show your results to the UUA, and then they put on the website that you're a Green Sanctuary, and you can get a certificate you can put somewhere. But what's really important is the process. That it just is a way of facilitating dialogue, discussion, and engagement on these kinds of issues. It just gives you a model to work through and activities to engage in. So you might want to revisit that issue. Now, to my knowledge, you don't have regularly scheduled potlucks, right? And almost every other congregation has a regularly scheduled potluck. It's always the third Sunday, or it's always or it's the quarter or something like that. You might consider that, but then adopting your own statement of conscience on eating and so forth, and having guidelines that represent the values shared by this congregation. The process of creating, like, here's our guidelines for what we were going to do. That process is what's important than what you come up with. Right? So there's lots of things like that if you want to check with the UUA. It's interesting, Beth Casebolt, you know, I've never seen Beth, but she's the lead person for all the resources for this congregation. She's the next person up in the UUA chart, org chart, if you will. And so she can talk to you about that, but you can find all kinds of courses. And, you know, we've talked about whether to do something on a regular basis on Sundays, like an 8-week course that would meet 8 weeks in a row or once a month. And there's tons of stuff out there that are part of this topic. What I really wanted to do was to simply continue this conversation, because I think my sense is this congregation has had this conversation before. The issues of ethical eating and what should the congregation do come, and then other issues come into play, and we move on, and then we come back to things, and we revisit issues. So I'm hoping that I'm using this Thanksgiving themed message as a way of saying maybe we want to continue that conversation. You want to talk amongst yourselves about what you'd like to do, find some programming, whether it's RE type programming or activities, new member type activities, whether potlucks or special potlucks. The one in Hagerstown has a special vegetarian only potluck. And then the one in the Quaker meeting, it's always the fourth Sunday, and that's just an open potluck. But then there are the values associated with simplicity that are inculcated into that community are reflected in that potluck. So there's lots of things you can do, and all I can really do is encourage you to just have the conversation and introduce you to some resources and kind of facilitate to that extent, right? So that's really all I have for that. I don't know if you're expecting like this finger wagging thing about, stop eating, things that have faces or mothers. But I'll be honest with you, I'm not there. I mean, I do eat some meat. And so, like I said, I'm all over the place, but I never stop thinking about it. I mean, it's just been a part of my life. The values associated with it, plus and minus, are so ingrained in me. And there's all these blessings and traumas associated with food and with eating. And it's just led me to keep studying that. And so as a study, I've been doing, as I said, since the 1990s, very active. And it was through my participation in the Unitarian Universalist Church of Rockville initially that I got that start. When the ethical eating issue came up, I was already by then serving as a minister at the UU Fellowship in Montgomery, Alabama. And so I made sure, that's one advantage that the minister has of being able to kind of shape or lead. I said, let's get on top of this one. We don't have to get onto every social action issue, but let's get on this one and work through it. And I was able to do that with that congregation. So that's all I really wanted to share with you on that one. I'm going to go ahead and close, and then we'll have our final music, and then we'll again have a little break before we continue our conversation on some other things. But the closing words are from that study action guide that was made available to congregations. It's a prayer offered by Elizabeth Green, which I've kind of updated and adapted just a little bit. And so these will be our closing words for the day. Spirit, who is all things to us, presence in which we live and move and breathe and have our being. What a gift to be here together, to be able to share food, our spirit, ourselves. We ask no blessings on our food nor upon ourselves, because the blessings is always here, if we but pay attention. What we do ask is for the courage and wisdom to be mindful of the great blessings in our lives. We ask that we remember to cherish food we share, savoring the taste, smells, the feel, the miracle of nourishment to our bodies, gifts of our lovely earth. We ask too that we remember to cherish each other, to taste and savor our relationships, to understand that we know of the sacred. We know through these bodies and through these connections of friendship and love. Grant us the wisdom to pay attention. Grant us the generosity and strength to open our hearts. So be it, and blessed be. I had a story in the original draft. I'll end real quickly with it. And it sort of goes to respecting our differences. It's something I learned at the school where I'm teaching, which is associated with the Air Force Academy, or it was when I started. In the early 1960s, they were having problems with their pilots, and their training scores were going down. They're difficult, and they determined the problem in many cases was the cockpit itself, the environment in the cockpit, the ability to easily handle and reach and manipulate the controls. And they put out bids for better cockpits. And as a part of that, they took measurements of all their pilots in 11 different categories, right? Total height, arm length, leg length, torso, seat. They had 11 measurements. And they said, we want a cockpit that meets the average for all of these. And then, so they came up with like the average pilot. And then they compared it to the actual people who they studied, or gave the information. Not one pilot met all 11 criteria. Not one person was totally average. Okay? And I think that's how we have to approach to recognizing each other's eating. One plan does not fit all. One style does not necessarily fit all. Everybody's got different needs. And in our own mind, we think, well, yeah, I know you say you can't get enough protein doing this, but I know that you can. Well, that's wagging a finger. And you know, we got to watch that, right? So just remember, nobody's average, right? I like that, the paradox that we're all the same and no two are alike, right? And so we have to try to respect that, because this topic in particular can generate more passion than more abstract issues of, like I said, war and peace. But remember that little example. There's no such thing. And I was taught, like, don't, you know, if you try to teach to the average student, you're not teaching to anybody, because nobody's an average student, right? The same criteria, right? But that was they're supposed to do the Farm Bill again. The Farm Bill's every 5 years. It came up in 2023. They just punted for a year. That extension's now expired. What I've come to appreciate is that Farm Bill has more to do with the health of America than just about anything. And I've also come to appreciate how the so-called, well, a little prejudice there, isn't it? How the food pyramid is like the tail that wags the dog, because that's what sets the standard for all the nutrition in schools, in SNAP programs, and everything else. And then I'm reading, and then, you know, that food pyramid is kind of like the average pilot.
Yeah.
Right? And so all of that is going to be up for debate in the next few weeks as they try to pass either an extension or revisit. They're going to try to pass that Farm Bill. So if you're a social justice person, if you care about this issue, just Google Farm Bill, right? The annual 5-year Farm Bill, which is now in year 6, and see where the debate is on that. See what organizations that you might subscribe to, or you know, let somebody. I had to read Farm Aid. Remember Willie Nelson's thing? Farm Aid. Go to farmaid.org, and they got all kinds of resources, like on how this bill works and what's that issue in this particular version, where the sticking points are, and what's they're going to try. So if you want something like in the short run, like what can you do tomorrow? You want to write a letter to somebody, and you want to then do some research on the Farm Bill and write to the people who are going to be working on that legislation, your senators and Congress people, and say, hey, this is coming up in the lame duck session, and I just want to express my view that these are my values, and I would like to see this Farm Bill represent those values. So that's something you can do like right now. Okay, that'll be the last word for now. This is going to be a continuing conversation. All right, our final hymn is number 134. Our World is One World. Betty and Pat will again play for us. Please stand as you're able. Join in our final hymn, then remain standing for our closing words. And don't forget to stay for our snacks and social time and our discussion afterwards. Thanks everyone for a wonderful service. Thanks especially all those folks who helped make it possible. Thanks Mac for getting us started. Beautiful music. And to the tech guys for doing all you do. I appreciate that. Chris and Greg back there. So thanks everybody for helping to make this a wonderful service. Be ours a religion like sunshine that goes everywhere. Its temple all space. Its shrine the good heart. Its creed all truth. Its ritual works of love and its profession of faith divine living. Let us go in peace.